I think it takes a few seconds to start. Okay, my name is, as Mary, is Leah Greathead, and I'm a lawyer with the Ministry of Attorney General, and we're here on June 25th in Creston, British Columbia, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about your life and living with polygamy. So could you start by giving your name for the record here? And
my name is Mary Louise Mackert.
And where do you live, Mary?
I live in Bonners Ferry, Idaho.
And how long have you lived there?
6 years.
Now, can you start by explaining, well, give us the full name for FLDS and just a little bit about what FLDS is?
The FLDS is the Fundamental Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it is an offshoot of the mainstream Mormon church. Only they would see it that the mainstream Mormon church is an offshoot of them because they believe they are the true Mormons. They are the followers of Joseph Smith. They practice Mormonism the way Joseph Smith established it, which included the practice of polygamy. They believe that people of race are not God's light and delight from children, and those of color will not receive their blessings in heaven till his light and delight from children have received their blessings. They also believe in blood atonement. They believe that there are some sins that are so great that even the blood of Jesus Christ cannot cover your sin debt, and in order to be redeemed, you submit to your own life being taken.
And what was your connection with the FLDS church?
I was born in Hilldale, Utah, which is the Utah side of the FLDS community in what is known today as Colorado City, Arizona.
Was it called something else before?
It was called Short Creek when I was born there, down there. And we were crickers. We came from the creek. And I was my mother's first child. My mother was my father's third wife. And my father had converted to the Fundamental Mormon Church. And he had 3 wives. And I married into it, but it became the 6th out of 7 wives. So every generation on my mother's side of the family, from me back to Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, has believed and practiced polygamy.
And who was your dad and who was your mom?
My dad is Clyde Chapman Mackert. My mother is Myra Coons Mackert. Only she never used the name Mackert. We used a fictitious name.
Oh.
Yes.
What was your fictitious name?
Chapman, my dad's
Chapman.
middle name.
Oh. And you said your mother was his third wife?
Yes.
And can you describe your childhood growing up? Where were you born first?
I was born down in the community there in Colorado City, Arizona, what is Colorado City, Arizona today, and lived there till I finished 2nd grade. And I was my father's 6th child. And at that point in his family, he had time for his children. And as his family grew and the responsibilities got greater, my father got more and more distant. And I found myself groveling for crumbs of affection, you might say, trying to matter to him, because at some point I had mattered to him and I didn't understand what I had done to lose favor with him. And so I was bending over backwards doing everything I could to win favor again. And it was, I think every single one of my siblings have a different story, depending on, and a different perspective, depending on where they grew up in the whole dynamic of that. There were 27 of us. And then when I was 15, he married another woman who had 4 children. So we had...
And that was his 4th wife?
His
then?
4th wife. And we had step-siblings, and so there were 31 children in this household. And there aren't enough hours in a day for a man to father that many children. And I believe polygamy just turns men into sperm donors. They can't even really make an adequate living to support their families. And my mother had to work outside the home to support her family. And basically, when we moved to Salt Lake, I mean, she took care of the bare necessities, what we absolutely had to have, paid the bills, and turned over all her surplus to my dad. And so she was supporting her family and then helping to support the other women's larger families while my dad was working a job.
When you lived in Salt Lake City, did you all live in one house?
No, we lived in separate homes, and eventually he got homes that were within a 6-mile radius of each other. We did attend different high schools, and so it was, I mean, but we were close enough that we saw each other on a regular basis in that we had family Sunday school together, and we did activities together. And one summer I suggested to Dad that we, rather than have a boring summer where I stayed home all summer long and tended my mother's children, couldn't we rotate the older girls that tended in the summertime, and we could get to go to the other mothers' homes, and that was a much more pleasant summer when we rotated like that, because I got to see my other siblings and get to know the other mothers a little bit better, and they got to know me a little better too, and rather than be stuck at home all day long with my mother's children.
Right.
You know.
How was your relationship with your father?
I wanted so to please him. I would have done anything to please him. And I think that was rooted in the fact that he had violated me at a very young age. And told me that we had this secret and special love. And then I found out that this secret and special love he had for my sister too, and my other sister, and my other sister, and so it wasn't so secret and wasn't so special. And at a very young age, I was scared of him because of those things he'd done to me. And I remember one time in particular, my mother was trying to get me to clean up the house because Daddy was coming home that night, and I told her I didn't want him to come home, that he scared me. And she says, "Oh no, you love your daddy, and he's scary because he has to scare away the boogeyman, anyone who would be bad or would hurt me." And that day, my mother had redefined love for me. And any man who put that knot in my stomach, I thought I was in love with. And I sought out men that were abusive or unavailable emotionally or had no interest in me. And I was always trying to, I was needy and clingy and trying to win them over. Like the Beauty and the Beast story. I was trying to make a prince out of a beast, and I couldn't win. I couldn't win.
And what about your relationship with your mother? As a child, when you were growing up?
My mother was very instrumental in making me who I am today. She's a very strong, independent woman. She had to be the breadwinner, and she had 7 children. And she taught me to love to work, to love to cook, to love to have a clean home, to love all those things that are domestic. And I really do love them. I've been playing in my food since I was a kid, and I still play in my food. My kids say, "Mom, you're a gourmet cook," because I love food, and I love preparing it for people, and I love setting it in front of them and seeing the delight on their face. And those things my mother taught me. Right. And but on another level, because of her hurt, she wasn't available emotionally there. And because of what she'd been taught, she couldn't allow me to feel what I was feeling and to do what I wanted to do with my life.
Did you have a relationship with your father's other wives?
I did. A very strained one with the 2 women who'd married him before my mother, much like the relationship my mother had with them. That kind of trickled down. My mother was my dad's favorite wife, and being the favorite wife is a curse. You don't want it, because the other women are envious of it, and everybody's vying for it, and so you're put down and tore down and ostracized in a lot of ways. some women, I'll hear them talk about this great camaraderie they have with their sister wives, and I go, not true, not true. Because every day of your life is competition for his resources, and they are limited. And there's not enough of him to go around.
Right.
And so either you have to be content to not have your needs met, or you're struggling all the time. And though it's not an open, out-and-out cat fight, it is real passive-aggressive kind of stuff that's going on underneath. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of little snide, snippet little remarks that they laugh off. Like, sarcasm was a big thing in our family. But there was more truth to what was being said than people wanted to get their arms around. There's a lot of sarcasm. But it really spoke how they really felt.
Right. Now, you mentioned Short Creek, and are you aware of the events from the 50s of Short Creek and what happened?
When Governor Pyle attempted to rescue those children in Colorado City, I was a year and a half old. And to this day, patriotic songs make me cry. I can't get through singing God Bless America or those songs they sang as they stood in that prayer circle when the governor and all the troopers were coming in to take us away. And I was probably 13 years old before I was no longer afraid of police officers. In Salt Lake City, just driving down the street in the car, we'd see a police car, and we would lay down on the seats. Now, I think my mother just thought we were being silly. We were afraid.
And was it from more than the incident in the early 50s? The interaction with the police officer?
No, it was from that. And my younger siblings, my next sister wasn't even born.
Right.
But I taught her to be afraid of police officers.
Right.
Because my fear was so great. And she taught the next one. I taught them all to be afraid of police officers. When I was 13, there was a police officer that, going around the corner, hit my dog. And he came to the door, offered to pay all the vet bills and everything. And I remember saying to my mother, he was so nice. That was just so unthinkable to me. And and here I'm going to public school where they're teaching you police officers are your friends. And I'm going, no, they're not. They'll put my daddy in jail. They'll take us away and put us in the home of strangers. I would not run to a police officer for help. That's the last place I would go. And they're trying to teach us, officer friendly. And I'm going, no. Officer scary. Not going there.
So when did you leave Short Creek for Colorado City?
I had finished up second grade. And
oh, yes, you said that.
And my dad moved my mother and her sister, that were both married to him, to Grand Junction, Colorado. And we stayed there, I think it was about a year and a half. And then he moved my mother to Salt Lake. And then eventually Donna came to Salt Lake, too.
And Donna was one of the other wives?
Yes, my mother's sister that had married my dad before mother did.
Right. So she was the second wife, Donna
she was? She was the second wife.
And who was the first wife?
Midge.
Mm-hmm. And did Midge move up as well to Salt Lake City?
Eventually she did, but my dad was working in the coal mines in the LaSalle Mountains, and she was living in Moab, and Donna and mother were up in the Salt Lake area. And then eventually my dad he finished his accounting degree, and he got a job in Salt Lake and moved me up to Salt Lake. And we were all much closer together.
Right. And was marriage taught as part of your religious upbringing?
Oh, yes. It was like what women did. You grew up and you got married and you had babies. And the younger you got married, it's like the more spiritually mature you were, And I remember I was probably about 13, 14, and people would say, oh, Mary, she's just so spiritually mature. Well, what I see now when I look back on that is, yeah, I knew how to clean house and take care of kids and cook. So I was ready to get married.
At 13 or 14?
At 13 or 14, I was ready to get married. You know, and I was physically mature enough that I could have had babies at that age. I mean, I was menstruating, and so it was like they're planting stuff in my head so that I'll embrace that.
And
that it's time to get married.
And did you get married?
I was 17 when I got married, and I was, my father had married his fourth wife when I was 15, and I fell in love with her son, and I wanted to marry him, and he wanted to marry me. And my mother wasn't going to let it happen. This woman had been divorced 3 times. She had converted out of the mainstream Mormon church to the polygamy, married my dad. She just kept telling me that this example of divorce had been demonstrated in this young man's life, and that she didn't believe he would ever take a second wife, that I would end up, he would end up leaving me with our children to raise alone, and that it just wouldn't be a wise thing for me to do. I also, when I was a little girl, my mother quilts, and a lot of the women quilt. And there would be these quilting parties, and they would put on this quilt, and all these ladies would come over to finish a quilt. And I remember playing underneath the quilt as a little girl, and I would hear these ladies talk about this poor young girl who was the first wife, and how she had to take care of all his sex drive, and she was having a baby every 9 months, and how unhealthy that is for her body, and she just needed a sister wife to help take care of him, and that would solve a lot of the problems, you know, and then her body could rest, and he would be taken care of and all this, and as I would hear these old women talk, it made me afraid to be the first wife. So they start planting the seeds when you're really young to prime you for this.
So you got married at 17, and who did you marry?
I married Wilford Alvin Draper. They called him Uncle Bill.
And how old was he?
He was 50. He turned 52 weeks after I married him. He was 2.5 years older than my dad.
And how did the marriage come about? How to him in particular?
When I realized that there's no way I could marry my sweetheart, that it just wouldn't happen. And my heart's desire was to please my parents, and I knew that wouldn't please them. I decided that I was going to go ahead and submit to being placed and let the prophet get revelation as to where I belonged and get married. And this decision took place while this young man was away on a work mission. So he wasn't there to influence me differently. And it was...
So you meet the young man that you love?
Yes, my sweetheart was away on his work mission. And my older sister that was married to the prophet, Roy Johnson, Carol, she had invited me down to Colorado City to stay with her over the Christmas holiday. I was so excited. I thought, finally I can see him, my sweetheart, because he was down there on a work mission. And I felt so betrayed by them, because when I got down there, I found out he had gone home because he'd been real homesick. They let him go home during the same time they let me come down. So it was like, I was so depressed. I cried uncontrollably, just cried that whole weekend. And my sister can put her arm around me and try and comfort me. There was nothing anybody could say or do to stop me from crying. Every time I thought of him, I just cried and cried and cried and cried. And I couldn't stop crying. And I got back home and I just knew they were not going to let me marry him. And so I decided to go ahead and submit to this arranged marriage.
And so the prophet had a revelation about who you were.
Well, I went there to get that. But I felt like, again, they played a trick on me, and that they made me pick who. Because he told me, I want you to go home, and I want you to pray, and I want you to get revelation. Now, my dad had done something he had never done before in all the time I had ever known him, and that was to abdicate or surrender his parental authority in an incident with me. I learned to sew at a very young age, and I was going to public school. Mini skirts were in style, and I had to wear dresses down that at least covered my knee. That's what my dad required. The school dress code said when you knelt on the floor, your skirt had to touch, the hem of your garment had to touch the floor. All I wanted was the standard, the dress code for the school. And I would sew myself clothes, short skirts, and hang them underneath my long ones in the closet. I'd dress with the short skirt under the long skirt and take the long one off on the way to school. And one day my mother forgot something and came back to get it and saw me walking down the street in this short skirt. And I was in trouble. I'd been busted. And my father sent me to Bill Draper, to Uncle Bill. He says, the brethren have given him the responsibility of educating the young people of marriage age. And he says, since you won't listen to me, since all that I have to say doesn't make a difference to you, I want you to go talk to him. And I went and talked to him. And but just that, my father sending me there said loudly and clearly to me that that's who my father wanted me to marry. The advantages of marrying this man, and I thought this all through, was no one knew how many wives he had, how many children he had. He was one of these men who lived a secretive lifestyle within the group. The only ones who knew were like the prophets and apostles knew. He was the right-hand man to the prophet, which was a good thing as far as my status as to who I was marrying. He was what they called a business tycoon. People thought he had a lot of money because he owned his own business. So I was going to be going to someone of prominence, someone I could marry him and never see my sweetheart ever again. Never have to face him and say, I don't love you. Because I couldn't say those words. And so in the responsibility of choosing who and getting revelation for myself, I knew what direction my dad was pointing me, and it would meet all that criteria for me. And so that's who I named.
And were you his first wife?
No. I was the 6th out of 7 wives to this man.
And did you take his last name?
No.
No.
He, all the time I had been married to him, all my identification had the fictitious name my mother had used with us. So I went to school as Mary Chapman. My driver's license said Mary Chapman. So when I married him, everything stayed that way until
Did you have a driver's license
I
at
did.
17?
I did, but he did not allow me to drive after I married him. And so it ended up expiring. And I had to go take it later when he allowed me to drive. I had to go take a written test again and get a new license. But at that time, I could just take on any name. I didn't have to produce a marriage certificate to prove that I had been married. I just went down and told them my name was Mary Hill, because my husband said, when you take the kids to the doctor, you're going to use the last name Hill, and your husband's Jonathan Hill, and gave me the address of another man in the group as to where, and my bills would get sent to him. He was a business partner of my husband, and then the bills would get brought to my husband, and he'd pay them, But I used a fictitious name, and it wasn't until right before I left him that he allowed me to even get birth certificates for my 5 children. I had 5 boys, and my oldest one was 10 years old when I got his delayed birth certificate. And my husband signed affidavits saying he was their father, and my dad signed an affidavit saying he had first-hand information that those were the children of Bill Draper and Mary Mackert, which he really didn't have. And Rule and Jeff notarized them.
And that's how they got their birth certificate?
And that's how I got their birth certificates.
And now you mentioned that your husband owned his own business. Were you, did he share financial information with you about the business? Or?
Nope, I was not privy to any of the financial standing in the family, the kind of income we had. One woman started working outside of the home after I married him, and he had a very young family for how old he was, because he had converted to the the FLDS from the mainstream Mormon church, and his first wife had left him. So his second wife, the first plural, the one out of in polygamy,
Right.
she was the same age as his oldest daughter from that first marriage. And I was a year younger than the youngest daughter from his first family.
Right.
And he had a very young family. When I married him, there were more adults in that family than there were children. But that changed very quickly.
And so did you have access to finances and money in that, being a plural wife?
Well, when I needed something, I'd go and ask him. And it was hard to always be asking for your sanitary products and whatever else I needed that was not provided for the family as a whole. And he would give me money to go and do my personal shopping, and then I had to give him back the change when I came back. I didn't have a dime in my purse.
What about clothes? Could you wear whatever you wanted, or how does that work?
He liked shirt-waist dresses, and there was a pattern. We all used the same pattern for, just different sizes.
Right.
Same pattern, different sizes. And you could get a little bit creative, but he liked lace down the front, a belt, had to have a belt, a button down the front. We didn't do those puffy sleeve things. Thank you, Lord. I hate those. But he, everything was these pastel colors with flowers, and when I had my colors done after I left, no wonder why I felt sick every day of my married life. Those are so not my colors. I'm a vivid summer, and it's just like I was having the breath like I was a spring, and it was just I didn't feel good every day.
Right.
And I remember making myself this blue dress. This one time it was just plain blue. I loved that thing. I wore it till it was a rag because it was in my vivid palette,
Mm-hmm.
the vivid colors palette.
Right.
And I just loved that dress.
So was it your husband deciding, or the prophet deciding, or who
My
deciding?
husband.
Your husband deciding.
And I'd gone from my father deciding what I wore to my husband deciding what I wore. And when I left, a friend of mine offered to buy me a couple outfits, so I didn't look so pliggy. And we went to the store. And I would try on stuff, and I'd come out, what do you think? And he'd say, it doesn't matter what I think. What do you think? And I'd go back in the dressing room, change, and come out with the neighbor. Well, what do you think? It doesn't matter what I think. You have to wear it. What do you think? I went back in that dressing room, and I slid down the wall of that dressing room floor to the floor, and I sat there on the floor and cried. Because I couldn't tell you what I liked. I could dress to please my father and my mother. I could dress to please my husband, but I didn't know how to please me. I didn't know what I liked.
You didn't have an opportunity to make many choices, I guess.
They were made for me. Choices were made for me. I didn't develop that until after I left. And then when I started understanding what I love it with a passion. And it's like my kids say, you're so hard to buy for, Mom, because you're so picky. I said, no, I just know what I like. And I won't settle anymore for anything less than what I like. But our budget was so limited, and people thought this man had all kinds of money because he was this business tycoon, but it was like, so you know how some people live in their money, and some people drive their money, and some people wear their money? We lived in our money. We had a nice home. The nicest thing I'd ever seen in all my life. But we drove nice cars. He had nice cars compared to the other people in the group. But I had 3 changes of clothes. Period. The end. Underwear, everything. Dresses. I had 2 everyday dresses and 1 Sunday best dress. I had 2 pairs of shoes, the best pair of shoes and everyday pair of shoes. That was it. 3 changes of clothes, and so did my children. You try getting by with 3 changes of clothes with a baby who's in diapers.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're washing constantly.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't have clothes to wear because the washing's not done yet.
Yeah. And how was it being a plural wife? How many wives did your husband have total? In like
7, because I count his first wife from the church before he joined polygamy. He had 7 wives, but there were 6 of us all in one house.
when you first married, or
5,
was there any
5 of us when I first married
And
Tyler in the house.
And
And
someone
he
joined
had
us.
married a woman 3 months before he married me. And I later found out hadn't even consummated the marriage yet. I mean, because she knew nothing about the birds and the bees, and he had to teach her all this stuff. And I came knowing all that stuff, and I got married to have children, and I just wanted to get after having children. It wasn't about we're in love and this is wonderful. It was, this is a business arrangement. I do this and I get to go to heaven, and the bonus is I get to have children. And I wanted children.
And so how was it being a plural wife?
Stressful. Lonely. Friendless. He would not allow the women to discuss things among each other, among ourselves. Everything had to go through him. You had a problem with somebody, you went to him. And he never got the two of us together to talk. It went through him, and he came back to you. And I grew to understand through 16 years of this that he was telling each of us what we wanted to hear. And so each of us is going, I'm being obedient to my husband, and she's just rebellious and disobedient, and looking down at the other person because of it. And it was, and then when you, there's a certain amount of betrayal even with him. So you have no true friend, because there's no true intimacy in your relationship, husband-wife relationship, because he has secrets from you, because he has other women.
Was it competitive at all?
Oh, yeah. Very competitive. And it just, his resources are limited. And everybody's trying to get their needs met. And it's this silent war, this silent cold war every day that's going on. And my kids just couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand why somebody else got to do something that they got told no about. Why people got to have things that they got told no about. And because I was the favorite wife, it's like everybody else's needs had to be met before mine, because then the majority of the people would be happy. And, you have to play the numbers. And one time he said to me, I said, this is an awful way to live. Every day of your life, someone you love dearly is angry. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, well, Brother Musser said they won't all be mad at you on the same day. I says, but every day somebody's mad.
What about your sons and their relationship with their father? Did they have a relationship with their dad?
Part of why I left was because my husband has 35 children. There aren't enough hours in the day for him to father those children. And I had trained my children well. They didn't have a lot of problems. They didn't get into a lot of trouble. And so that meant they didn't have any time with their dad, because he was always putting out the fires, going where the problems were. I pretty much took care of me and mine. That's why I was a favorite wife. I wasn't a problem to him. But that created a problem for my children. And they began to escalate the mischief to get an audience with their father. And for children, if they can't get positive attention, they'll get negative attention rather than be ignored. And they felt like they were being ignored. For a few years, we lived out at what we call the farm, and when we moved back up to the big house, my kids came to me shortly after we got back up there and said, well, when's Father going to come have dinner with us? I says, I don't know. You go and ask him. And he agreed to come and have dinner with us. And we waited and waited and waited. We sent for him and waited and waited. And finally, I had to put my kids to bed, so we ate our dinner. I put them to bed, and he came up to eat his dinner after my children were in bed. And I'd left his plate in the microwave. I turned it on, warmed it up, threw the plate in front of him, said goodnight, went to bed. I was so mad. He had no time for us. And I wanted a home of my own so he would come and spend time with us when we didn't have a problem and when we weren't in trouble. And he said, no, I can't afford that. And I said, you don't understand. I'm not talking about a want. I'm talking about a need. This is what we have to survive. I'll do whatever it takes to get it. And he found out whatever it takes. I would too, including leaving.
Right.
And I didn't really start out to leave the religion or him. I just wanted a home of my own. I was going to go get a job, move the kids into an apartment where he could come and see us and spend time with us. But in that whole process, when he abducted me, locked me in my room for a day and a half, threatened to kill me.
And sorry, so what are you talking about now? When was that?
When I left him, I'd been gone for 2 days.
This is when you wanted to move your kids to the apartment?
Right.
Yeah.
I left to go get a job, and I was going to get an apartment and move my kids into it. He sent his older boys over. They abducted me, forcefully brought me back to the house, where he threatened to blood atone me. I had been under another man's roof for 2 nights, and he wouldn't believe that I'd remained faithful to my marriage covenant. So he was going to kill me over this. And I wouldn't confess that I did it, because I hadn't. And I laid there on my bed in my room there where he had locked me, and I cried, and I said, Lord, if these are your people, send me to hell. I don't want to be where they are. This is not right. And I was done. That there and then. I was done with the marriage, done with the religion. I was out of it. I was going to get my kids out.
And how did you do that?
Well, he finally, after he could not persuade me, after every avenue, threatening me, crying, pleading, begging, preaching at me. Oh, we went through the whole gamut of emotions in that day and a half. And when he could see I wouldn't budge, he said that if I would go and meet with Rule and Jeff, and if I still wanted to leave, he would let me leave. I knew there was nothing Rule and Jeff could say that would change my mind. And I agreed.
And Rulon Jess was the prophet by then?
Well, he was acting as the prophet. Roy Johnson was still alive, but his health was such he was not acting as the prophet. He was not able to see people and interview people.
Right.
So I went and I sat there in Rule and Jeff's office, and he asked me the first question. And I started to answer, and my husband interrupted me and finished answering my question. And the two of them talked back and forth, and I sat there in that chair in his office, and I said, women have no voice here. They didn't want to hear what I had to say. And basically, I felt like I'd been patted on the head and told to be a good little girl and go home and do what was right. And I said, I'm gone. I'm out of here. And when my husband and I got in the car and started driving back from this interview with Rue and Jeff, I started to shake so bad I couldn't control it. I couldn't stop it. And I just told him, you have to let me out. And he tried to get me to, just let me get you a motel room. You just need to think about this. I said, I've done nothing but think about this. For 2 years, I've done nothing but think about it. To the point it has made me sick. And I said, you stop this car, you let me out, or I will jump. Oh, don't get dramatic on me, he said, And he pulled over in the parking lot of an Albertsons there on Foothill Drive. And before he let me out, he just said he wanted to give me money. So I'd be all right. He cared. And I says, I don't need your money. I don't want your money. I've got money. Where did you get money? Well, the guy that's staying with gave it to me. I'd never had a $20 bill before in my life that wasn't designated to be spent someplace. And when he handed me that, I said, what is this for? And he says, for whatever. I said, for whatever? He says, for whatever comes up, for whatever you want, for whatever you need, for whatever. I never had that in my life, and I felt so empowered by a stinking $20 bill. Mm-hmm. $20 empowered me. And I had tucked it inside my shoe when the boys abducted me, so they wouldn't take it from me. And I took it out and I looked at it in that room for a day and a half, knowing that if I could just get out of there, I could buy a bus token, I could make a phone call, I could do whatever I needed to do because I had a $20 bill. That gave me freedom.
Right.
That liberated me.
Yeah.
That empowered me.
And so when was that? When did you leave?
September 2nd, 1985. My liberation day. For years I celebrated it.
Right.
Like some people do birthdays.
Right.
I bring cake into everybody in the office, my favorite cake.
Right.
Oh, is it your birthday? No, this is my Liberation Day. Yeah, it's celebrated.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that, well, not feeling well, I believe, in your marriage. Did you suffer from depression or anything like that while you were?
I was under so much stress. I learned did this to me that I experienced symptoms of hypoglycemia and diabetes. It was like when I ate sugar, you had to scrape me off the ceiling, and when I didn't, I couldn't lift my leg off the bed. And I went to see a doctor, and he just said, "You're not processing sugar." So I started not eating any sugar, but food, period, did that to me. Because it all converts to carbohydrates and sugar. That's what your body does to it. And it's just like if I ate, I'd get so wound up I couldn't sleep at night. And when I didn't eat, I had no energy at all. My arms and legs felt heavy. And after I left, magically gone. It was all stress-induced. And I sunk into a deep depression.
After you left?
No, before I left. For 2 years, I was so severely depressed and going through this hypoglycemic and diabetic state all the time, and pushing and driving myself to get out of bed and get going, and then can't go to sleep at night when it's time to go to bed. And I would get up and clean for hours just to be busy, to keep my mind going, because I felt like I was going insane. The sleep deprivation alone, and I didn't want to live anymore. And I think about suicide all the time. And then I think about my babies. Who would defend them? All they would ever be is second best. They would never know how much they were loved without me as their wife. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't sentence them to that. Yeah. And so it was either do myself in or leave. So I chose to live.
To leave, huh?
Uh-huh. To live and to leave.
So there are some tissues there.
Oh.
So when you got married at 17 to your 50-year-old husband, what level of education did you have at that point?
I had finished 11th grade. I had one more year of high school left. And I asked him if I could go finish my high school diploma, and he told me I didn't need that to be a wife and a mother.
So I take it you didn't get to do that then?
No.
Not then.
And after I left him, I went, because I so wanted my high school diploma. And so I went down to the community college or the community high school, and they looked at my records. I needed 1.5 credits to graduate. And she says, well, just take the GED. And I said, I don't want a GED. I want a diploma. She said, GED is 2.5 credits, and you only need 1.5 to graduate. So let's see how you do on the test. So I went and took the GED test. After 16 years of marriage, where I seldom ever picked up a book and read that wasn't scripture, my lowest score was in the 91 percentile in math.
Wow.
And I was mad. Because math is my favorite subject, and in my mind I did the poorest in math.
Right.
It was like, ah. And this dear woman, reached across her desk and grabbed my arm, and she said, Mary, people don't do what you just did. You're an extremely brilliant woman. No one had ever told me that before.
Right.
It was hard to believe, And they gave me my diploma because I scored so high.
Oh, good.
So I got my diploma, and then I went on to...
and when was that? When did you get your diploma?
Well, I left it would have been in 1985, right after I left. I got it before the end of the year. I left in September, and I got it then. And then I went for some secretarial training and finished that the following January, and got a job as a secretary, and still couldn't get off public assistance with that wage, and was so determined to get off public assistance. It was such an embarrassment to me to use public assistance, which just really surprises me today with the FLDS and how they lead the beast, they call it. They use the welfare system to support their large families because we were too proud to do that. We never would. We didn't need the government. God was going to take care of our families. And we lived in such poverty to prove it that we could. And now they use the government to support their families.
Right.
And but we then I went on. When I couldn't support my family on that wage, I was working at a place called the Career Guidance Center that helps people with vocational training. And I went and talked to one of the counselors there, and they said that because I had documented depression, I was still struggling with the depression from my marriage, and if I would continue that counseling, he says, I know you're doing extremely well, but he says, as long as you'll go once a month for your counseling, we can fund this. And they funded my education. And I went and got an associate's degree at the community college, and then went on to the University of Utah and got a bachelor's degree in business management. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was the first daughter of my father to have a college education.
Right. And so, when you left, you took your 5 boys with you?
No.
No.
That was the hardest thing about leaving. My husband said, these are children of the covenant. They belong to the father, not to the mother. You leave with a shirt on your back. And I literally walked out with a shirt on my back. I had a friend who was a lawyer. He was a man who lived across the street from us. And they had moved, when I say across the street from us, that's while I was married to my husband. And they had moved, and I looked him up in the phone book, and I called. And I said, Charlotte, I know that George is a lawyer. I don't know what kind of lawyer, but I need a lawyer to help me get my kids. And I met with George, and he's a corporate lawyer. He doesn't do family law. Mm-hmm. But George paid all my court fees, and he represented me in court and got me custody of my 5 boys. And I said, one day, George, I'll repay you. Somehow I'll get a job and I'll repay you. He says, no, the debt is paid in full. I said, what do you mean? He says, I became a lawyer to help people. And he says, every day I stand up in court and I defend things I don't even believe in. Today I'm in court defending something I really believe in. And there's this warm fuzzy right here. Payment is full.
And just to back up a little bit, while you were married, what kind of contact did you have with your parents and your siblings?
Because my husband lived a secretive lifestyle, my siblings didn't know who I was married to. And probably some of my other mothers didn't for a while. My mother and my dad and the prophet and my sister Carol. And my husband and I were the only people in that room that day. And we made our vows.
Why was your sister Carol in particular in the room?
She was married to the prophet.
She was married to Leroy Johnson?
Yes, to Leroy Johnson. And he performed the marriage. And she was proud of me. And when Carol had married Roy Johnson, she became Saint Carol. She could do no wrong.
How old
because this marrying into the principal and marrying an older man and submitting, and here I was doing the same thing, and I was now St. Mary.
And how old was Carol when she married Leroy Johnson?
She was 18 and he was 72.
He was 72.
Mm-hmm. And I knew that I was now looked on with great favor that day. Carol was pleased with me. I was following in her footsteps. My mother was pleased with me. I was living the principle, the first and only one of her daughters to marry into Carol had a different mother.
Oh, a different mother.
Different
right.
mother, same dad.
Right.
Okay? I was my mother's oldest daughter.
Right.
And here I was
Right.
going into the principal, which is what that's what she wanted for all of her daughters, was them to marry into the principal.
Right.
Like she had. And so it was, everybody in that room was asleep that day. And I tell people, I said, I've been to happier funerals than my wedding. It was a sad day for me. There was a big piece of me that died that day.
And so after it happened, your other siblings weren't informed, or?
No, this man's lifestyle was a secret. No one knew how many wives he had, how many children he had. My brothers would call girls that married that way poofers. They were there one day, and then they were gone. And it's like, you knew better than to ask where they went. Because they married into a family where it was a secret. And everybody knew. You just didn't ask. And if you asked, you didn't get an answer. Somebody just look at you. And not say things. And that's a question you don't ask. But they, in 16 years being married, I probably saw members of my family on maybe 10 different occasions. So it was rare that I got to see my family. And my mother said, I just struggle when I introduce you to people. This is my daughter Mary. And she didn't know what last name to put on the end of it.
Right.
And I said, well, that's just fine. This is my daughter Mary.
Right.
End it there. You know? She said, that's so uncomfortable. You know? I said, well, it's what it is.
So is your sister Carol still living?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any contact with her?
No. When they went into El Dorado, into the YFC ranch in El Dorado, I saw pictures of her on the internet. I haven't seen her since my dad's funeral. I saw her briefly across the way, but she wouldn't talk to me at my dad's funeral.
And so she follows Warren Jeffs now?
Mm-hmm.
And would she be allowed to speak with you?
I doubt it.
And do you have any other stepsisters or step-siblings or siblings that are still within the FLDS?
Oh, yes. Of my father's 27 children, about half of them are still believers and practice polygamy and follow someone in polygamy. The other half have left.
And the half that follow polygamy, have you had any contact with any of them?
Trying to think. Sometimes I've gone to a few family reunions, and there have been a few of them there that are part of the Centennial Park group. But basically the ones that follow Warren Jeffs won't come to those family reunions. Be a part of that. There's some that have left any particular kind of group, but still embrace the practice of polygamy, believe it, would live it if they could. You know, they could find two women who'd take them on, the guys would do it, you know.
No, I've heard the term apostate. Can you explain what that is?
An apostate is basically someone who used to believe and embrace the beliefs of the FLDS and has left.
And how are apostates viewed? Are they viewed in a certain way by the FLDS people?
They don't want to associate with apostates. They're told not to. I guess the best way to demonstrate this is to talk about my oldest son, who was the follower of Warren Jeffs, who now follows Winston Blackwell. And when he was down in Colorado City, because I was an apostate, when he married and my first grandchild was born, I found out through the grapevine that I was a grandmother. And I went up to Rulon Jeff's home where my grandson had been born that day and knocked at the door. And one of Rulon Jeff's wives answered the door and said, oh, I guess Ezra told you you're a grandma. And I said, no, but I'm here to see my grandson. She looked kind of startled. And I said, no. No, he didn't call me. And I went up there to the room, and Ezra about fell out of the chair. You know, like, how'd you find out, you know? And I held my grandson. And I told him how to splash in the toilet. splash in the toilet and you pull all the toilet paper off the roll. And told him to do all those naughty things his dad did when he was growing up. But when my granddaughter was born, she was 4 months old before I knew I had a granddaughter. And I used to call my son and say, I'm coming down to Colorado City, bring a Christmas present, I want to see the kids. Oh, that'd be great, Mom, he'd say when I got him on the phone. And I would call and leave messages. He'd never call me back. I'd have to keep calling and calling and hoping he would answer and hoping I could get a hold of him. And then I'd tell him I was coming and that would be great. And I'd get there and knock on the door and no one's home. No one would answer. And I'd leave the presents at the door and go and cry myself all the way back home. It just felt like just heartsick because I couldn't get to see my grandkids and they didn't get to know me. And that went on all the time he was following Warren Jeffs. And I ran into him one time when Eric was born. Eric was 4 months old. I got to see him.
Eric is a grandson?
The next grandson. And I got to hold him and love on him. We were in a public place. I just ran into them and it was like, whoa! and she was pregnant with Reagan and Reagan was born before I knew. You know, she was having another baby, and there's a big gap between Eric and Reagan. But anyway, when I moved up here, I got to spend 6 months with him and get to know my grandkids. Now he was following Winston, and I could have access to my grandchildren. And I could live in my son's home. And I'd gone down one time, and he let me open the door and let me come in and watch the kids open their presents. And it was 10:30 at night, and I asked him if I could spend the night. And there's this long pause. And then he says, I think it would be best for both of us if you did. So that's how we treat
a did you experience another wife being added? Like, were you the last plural wife in your marriage, or was there another wife?
No, after I'd married Bill, then he took his last wife, and she was the daughter of Rulon Jeff, mentally challenged young lady, and she was older than me. And there's a ceremony I'd never participated in before, a marriage ceremony, and they call it the Law of Sarah, and where a wife will take the hand of the bride and place it in her husband's hand, as if she's giving this bride to him. And we all stood in a line like bridesmaids would to welcome her into the family and to stand there as though we were all in agreement to this wedding, this union that was taking place. And I believe it was because Rulon just wanted that because of her mental incapacities. He wanted to know that she was being welcomed into our family, and he wanted it demonstrated.
How was she treated in your family?
She pretty much had the mental abilities of about a 12-year-old, and she wanted to have children, and so when she was pregnant with her first one, she had a lot of health problems, and when she delivered that baby, she nearly hemorrhaged to death. I mean, her uterus just collapsed, and she just hemorrhaged really bad. And because of the problems during the pregnancy and during the delivery, she didn't want to ever have another child ever again. And my husband respected that. Basically, she was very good at repetitive tasks. You give her something that never changes. It's always the same. She does really well at it. So she did the laundry for the family. That was her job. Every day, 6 days a week, she did laundry. And those washing machines and dryers went all day long for that, to wash all the clothes of that family. And people would bring down their dirty clothes in a basket, and at the end of the day, they were clean and folded, and they took them back upstairs to their apartments and put them away. And that's what she did all day long, was laundry.
Do you have any knowledge of or experience with reassignment of wives? Does that occur to your knowledge? Or?
Not till after I left, but I know that when Bill would talk about, because he had such a young family, that he wanted us after he passed away to all stay together. And for a short period of time, it was that way. But then Rule and Jeff started to, there was a lot going around about things my husband had done to his children. He molested my boys. And so they were taking his wives and marrying them, sealing them to other men because my husband wasn't worthy of his family. And I have knowledge of that because my oldest son went to the prophet and said, "Why are you doing this?" And he told him, "Your father's not worthy of his family." So they were taking the wives after he had died and marrying them off. But the rearranging and men being deemed unfaithful while they're still alive, that happened after Rule and Jeff died, and Warren Jeff became their prophet.
What about the age of women when they marry or sealed in the FLDS? Are you aware of any concerns about age, or what do you know about the age of the bride?
Before I was married, and I went and stayed with my sister Carol, who was married to Roy Johnson, the prophet. Roy Johnson had taken a young girl when she was 12 years old as a wife. Everybody says, well, he didn't consummate the marriage until she was old enough. But that was the youngest I'd ever heard of anyone ever getting married, and people were kind of like appalled at it, you know. But my experience has been, as time goes on, they're getting married younger and younger and younger, it happens before these young girls are emotionally mature enough to know what they even want out of life. And they are, I've seen men stand up on television in interviews and say, there are no bars on the windows, there are no locks on the doors, there are no chains around their ankles. They're free to do whatever they want to do. No, they're not. They're married off while they're at this tender age where peer pressure and pleasing their parents is so important to them, and they haven't really established their individuality yet. And then when that starts to happen, their bondage is their motherhood. We women are so nurturing and touchy-feely. Our feelings run so much of what we do, more than our brains, that no woman in her right mind will walk away from her children. And I speak from personal experience. Things had to get so ugly. Leaving was the only way I could live anymore. Before I would leave and walk away from my children and hope that I could get them. Things have to be really. My bondage with my children.
So do you still have contact with people who are in FLDS or have recently left it?
Mm-hmm. And I even help women get out of that. It's a part of, I love these women so much. I can't walk away merrily along my life path without stopping to say, wait a minute, there's something more important than just being happy and just doing whatever you want with your life. There are women who are hurting like you are hurting, who need help, who need encouragement, who need to know that outside of that religious circle that is their whole world, there is a whole other life that is sweet and fulfilling and desirable and good.
And so you said that you felt that the brides were getting younger and younger in the FLDS marriages. And so why do you think that? What's that based on?
Personal observation, because I do have contact with people who have contact with, who are related to the people who are getting married. And I do know that since I came up here to the northern panhandle of Idaho, I saw for the first time in all my experience an engagement. This young lady wanted to marry into this man's family, and I think she would be the fourth or the fifth wife, I'm not sure. And she was underage. And so for a whole year, she wore an engagement ring, went over and spent a lot of time with his wife and family, and on her 18th birthday got married. Why? Because I was watching, and I would have blown the whistle on him in a heartbeat. Would have had the government down on him so fast. And he knew it. And so there was this long engagement. So, you know, we just need more pressure like that.
And so you've talked a bit, but is there anything else that you could say about struggles that you've had to deal with because of polygamy?
In general, children that grow up in that have trouble adapting socially. I had trouble with relationships with men and relationships with women because I felt like women betrayed me. It was a long time before I could have a best friend, have a woman that I could pour my heart out to and trust with that information. Every man that was kind to me, I thought he wanted to take me to bed because that had been my only experience with men. They were just, I mean, I had gone from my father doing that to me to my husband, who I didn't even love. You know, it's not like I'd fallen in love with him. And I had a hard time connecting love and sex. I went through a lot of counseling to connect my emotions to the event. I would go through periods of time where I was either just really, really sad and couldn't stop crying, or I would be really angry and I didn't know why, or just feel really hurt. And I worked with counselors to walk back through the events to identify the event that had caused my emotions. And it was like they would be months apart. I had so disconnected from my feelings that I had to reconnect with them. And still, over 20 years out of it, I feel like a social misfit. I don't feel like I fit in most of the time. And I'm a solitary person, not by choice. It's just safer there. And the suicide thing, I'm over. The depression, I'm over. But, you know, there's scars. There's scars. There are things that rear their ugly head here and there. But we are the sum total of all our experiences. And I like what God's made out of my life.
And Mary, what do you do now?
I am a missionary to the Fundamentalist Mormons. And my focus is to help those who want to leave and to help those who want to stay understand why they need to leave. Because some of them are just so blinded by this. They need to stand back and take a look at the long-term effect of this. I mean, marrying a man who's so much older than you, your children will never have a father. In those large families, polygamy reduces men to sperm donors. That's it. And my children, when I talk to them, and I said, if you could change anything about your life, what would you change? I would want my dad to be young enough to throw a football with me, young enough to teach me how to fish, young enough to take me to ball games. They miss the companionship of a man, and there's no way, no matter how hard you try, a woman cannot teach a man how to be a man. It takes a man to do that. And they missed out on it. And they had to find other men who would step up to the plate and do that for them, who would mentor them, who would teach them what it is to be a man. And women, little girls, learn about men from their daddy. And they will marry a man just like their daddy. They will seek it out and find a man just like their daddy, because their daddy's the first man that they ever loved. He's a measuring stick for every man in their life. And when they grow up with a dad who is an absentee father, who's unavailable emotionally, guess who they marry? And they're bringing all these children into this world scarred that way.
And what about you talked about people helping people who are leaving polygamy. Would that include young men?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And what happens with the young men in the kind of FLDS culture when the older men, especially the prophets, are marrying so many women?
There aren't women for them to marry. And they're told they'll have to go out there and find them a wife and convert her and bring her back if they still want to live that way, you know. Most of them leave, and it's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, and we will be in hell. Because they're told if they don't live that, they'll not go to heaven, to the highest degree of glory in heaven, and become a god. And so that's hell. Anything short of the highest degree of glory in heaven is hell. And the majority of them turn to drug and alcohol abuse, riotous living, I call it, and promiscuity. And of my children's friends who had left, 50% of them committed suicide. It's so disheartening. And they hurt so bad with the rejection. And can't reconcile. And life gets just so painful. They don't want to live. I understand that.
Yeah.
And it's so sad that so many of them are sentenced to this in the name of their religion. And they need someone who understands and who can help them rebuild their life.
Well, thank you, Mary, for talking about this very difficult subject. And is there anything else that you'd like to say?
I would like to appeal to the courts of Canada to enforce the law. These children, if they knew to cry out, need ears that will hear. Because they're hurting. And most of them don't even know it.
Yeah.
They're hurting. And they need us to protect them from this. It's harmful. It's abusive, doesn't even cover it. This lifestyle is demeaning to women and harmful to children, and does nothing but inflate the egos of men. The FLDS religion isn't about anything but power and money and sex.
And is polygamy part of that?
Yeah. It's how many ladies do they get? It's their harem. And it's so evil. And it's degrading to human. It's an insult to human dignity. And yeah, I know these women are choosing, but they have limited choices. They're not given all their choices when they choose. And I know when the National Geographic came out and Zelpha talked about doing stucco with her brothers and the prostitute that was being taken by those men and And she talked about how she didn't want to live that way. As if everyone who doesn't live polygamy is a prostitute. And we were told that if we ever left, we would be nothing but prostitutes on the street. And I left and I thought, I pondered that statement. And I asked myself, what is a prostitute? A prostitute is a woman who gives sexual favors in exchange for something of value. I was a prostitute long before I ever left. Because heaven is a valuable thing, and that's what I gave myself to this man to obtain heaven. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. And I'll just confirm here that I haven't turned the recording off, and we just went straight through.